Welcome, Fireside with Peter Adkison. I am Peter Adkison. My co-host is Emma Larkins, and our guest today is Mike Elliott. Now, as you know, on this program, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games. And the game we are talking about is Magic the Gathering. And our guest today worked a ton on Magic the Gathering, down in the trenches, doing design and development. He's got a huge list of credits, and we're going to get right into it. Mike Elliott.
Hi, Peter.
Yes. The one and only.
It's good to have you here.
Oh, good to be back again. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
I can't believe we're doing this. It's great.
You're welcome. It's nice to reminisce and go back to the old days.
It is. That's why I'm doing this show.
Yeah.
It's just an excuse to get to people like to come over and sit around and chat who normally it would just be awkward to just say, hey, want to come over to my house and just sit around and talk about Magic for an hour?
Yeah,
That would be awkward. But if we do it on camera, then it's okay.
On camera. Yeah.
That doesn't seem so unusual.
Doesn't seem so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So what I like to start with is, who was Mike Elliott before Magic? Before he heard about Magic the Gathering and Wizards of the Coast and got caught up in all the mania?
All right. So kind of my origin story.
Yeah. Your origin. I heard it called a superhero origin story.
I've said that sometimes as a joke. Just I've told the story many times.
Yes.
So back then I was living in Phoenix. I was working night shift at a hospital. I was a medical technologist, which was kind of my fallback when I didn't get into medical school. I was.
Whoa! This did not come up in the pre-interview. You failed to get into medical school? Are you seriously?
So you're going to be a doctor.
You took a test and you got an F and you couldn't get in? Like, you're like one of the smartest people I know.
Well,
It's true.
Things happen, and it just didn't work out. But
Okay.
So I was working night shift at a hospital in the laboratory, and I would work I would work 10-hour shifts. So I would work a bunch of days in a row, and then I would have a bunch of days off.
Right.
And during the days off, I got into playing bridge.
Okay. Yeah.
And I had some friends from Northern California and Southern California. Several of them went to Caltech, and we had kind of a team, and we would get together to play in these bridge events all over the West Coast.
What is this with bridge? Bridge seems to have been deeply influential for the people who would go on and play big roles in the design and development of Magic the Gathering.
Yes, when I was talking with
is
the
it
people,
complicated or something? I've never played it.
Yeah, I've never played bridge before.
It was much more popular in the old days before kind of Texas Hold'em kind of took over as kind of the intellectual game. But it's kind of a math-based intellectual card game where you're kind of playing as a partnership and teammates, and you're trying to.
I was kind of joking. I do know what bridge is.
I don't know bridges.
It's surprising the number of Magic people at WotC. Like Richard Garfield played, Bill Rose played,
Joel
Charlie
Mick
Patino played, Joel Mick played. I think Scaff even played a little bit.
Right.
And it was like we could have.
I gotta admit that I've always felt that like my pedigree of gaming lacks because I never got into bridge. Like I feel like it's like one of those. It's a bucket list thing. Someday I just got to go back and like learn how to play bridge because otherwise there's this hole in my psyche.
So you said events. Were those tournaments? Were there prizes at these events?
There were no prizes. It was kind of like you played for points. Like the goal was to become a life master. Like I was a life master. We would basically go around and play, and we would all stay at the same hotels.
Okay.
Or we'd say, like, if it was in LA, we'd stay at Jeff's.
Separate rooms, though, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. or on couch. Yeah, separate rooms, couches, or a suite.
Right.
And then we would play in the events. The events often started at 1 in the afternoon and ran till like midnight. And you could play in the morning if you wanted to, but a lot of times when we got back, we would play board games after playing bridge for 8 hours during the day.
Right.
We would go back and we'd play like board games. And one of my teammates or good friends there was a guy, Jeff Goldsmith, who was a really hardcore gamer. I actually still see him these days at Gathering of Friends every year in New York.
Right.
Because he's still into board gaming. And
so now, just in context, I'm guessing this was like early 90s. Really early 90s, maybe even late 80s?
It was late 80s to early 90s.
Okay, right,
and,
right.
And like he would always bring in like the new games, and like Settlers of Catan came out.
Right.
Like we would play the
yeah.
German version of Settlers of Catan.
Right.
We'd play like History of the World and a bunch of
Right.
like
Right.
And so in May of '94, one of the games that he brought out was this game, Magic the Gathering.
Magic the Gathering.
Heard of it.
I always love it when we go to that part of the story. And then my friend, who was a gamer, showed me Magic the Gathering. It's always a great moment.
So he was explaining the game to us, and he's like, okay, there's a central deck in the center of the table, and it's a multiplayer game, and everyone's dealt out 7 cards. And then you play, and you can basically attack anyone you want.
You're not getting this confused with one of the other 12 trading card games that you've designed since then, right?
Well,
Because if I remember correctly, and I'm pretty sure I do, each player has their own deck of Magic cards.
so Jeff used to house rule a lot of games.
Oh, house rules for Magic. Yeah. Okay.
So,
Okay. Now I'm with you.
So he showed me this game and we played, and I'm like, wow, this is a lot of fun. So when I got back to Phoenix, I went to one of the local game stores over by ASU.
And you just bought one deck, right?
And I bought a deck, and I was reading through the rulebook, and I'm like, wow, this isn't anything like, like what we were playing.
Screw this. I'm.
And you said people were taking like 7 cards from the central deck.
Everyone was drawing from the same deck.
Yeah, there's a name for that format, right? Somebody has a huge pile of cards that are all fun cards. I've played that. I've actually played that way before.
It was kind of a way to adapt.
It's just an odd way to learn the game.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And yeah.
But I mean, because it was a group of us, he was trying to be inclusive and not have everyone break up.
Sure.
Okay.
Right.
So I remembered when I'd been at the store, there were some people playing. So I went back to the store, and one of the guys at the store showed me how to play like the real way. And I'm like, wow, this is like even more fun. So I started getting into it. I bought like a couple booster boxes and some decks. At the time, I was kind of like a young urban professional, so I had like a lot of free cash. So.
Right. Right.
So I started playing. The stores back then, this was before the Pro Tour, and a lot of the stores would run tournaments.
Sure.
And some of them
Yeah.
were actually like pretty big. I mean, I was in like an Ice Age tournament with probably 300 people.
Oh, wow.
And I did
Nice.
a Grand Melee tournament where everyone basically
Oh my God.
I think it started with 170.
Oh my God. I did a Grand Melee with 40 once with Richard actually.
Oh, explain to me Grand Melee. 'Cause I haven't
Okay,
actually heard
so
of this before.
you get however many people, doesn't matter how many people, and everybody sits in a circle, like with some configuration of tables, which is actually the tricky part. And everybody's playing Magic at the same time, but you have like an attack left or maybe attack
Right,
either way.
yeah.
You have a range of your spells like 2 down. And
Interesting.
so,
You're
and it takes a while to go
Yeah.
around the
right.
circle.
You're always attacking the person to. You're going clockwise. You're attacking the person to the left and
Okay.
being attacked by the person on your right.
Interesting.
Right.
And there's like markers every 5 people on the turns.
Right.
And then as people get thrown out, the markers get taken out.
Yeah,
So-
and then the table trickiness comes in because then how do you you gotta like every once in a while throw out a table and move
Yeah,
on the
get
chair.
a
It becomes-
smaller and
yeah,
smaller circle.
yeah, smaller
Cool,
one
yeah.
circle. Yeah, it's cool. It's a big commitment.
Yeah.
It's how to cram 2 hours of fun into about 20 hours.
Yeah.
But as I was playing, I would have a lot of people come up to me and say like, "Oh, like can you get me this card or this card?"
Right.
And I'm like, maybe there's like a business here, or,
Yeah.
like buying and selling cards.
Was there a
Right.
reason they came to you specifically?
Because I played a lot and I was kind of around the stores a lot playing. Like I really got into it. In fact, I got into it so much that I kind of cut out playing bridge.
Yeah,
Which
this is where the bridge story ends. Yeah,
yeah,
I like that part of the interview
Yeah.
too.
yeah.
And that's when I quit school, or this is when I quit being a lawyer, or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that didn't go over as well with my bridge friends. I think one of the last bridge events I did was the World Bridge Championships in Albuquerque in like September of '94.
Right.
And when I was there, it was kind of cool because there was I was like, oh, we're going to Albuquerque. I've heard there's like this amazing Magic store there, War Games West.
Right. Right.
So
right.
so I took a side trip over and went to War Games West and checked it out, and they just had like thousands and thousands of cards.
Right.
So
Well,
after,
War Games West was a big deal for Wizards in the early first year or two. War Games West, the retail department, Glenn Goddard is a good friend. He ran that, and then the distribution. They played a big part of Magic history in the early couple of years.
in early '95, I drove over from Phoenix to Albuquerque to War Games West specifically, and came back with like 2 5,000 count boxes worth of cards.
Right.
I was like,
So you were able to buy them as singles
Yes.
at that point. Okay.
but yeah. So as I said, kind of, I started buying and selling cards.
Yeah.
I worked out a deal with a couple of the stores where I would piggyback on their distribution orders. So like they were going to order like
Right.
10 cases of Revise, and I'm like, okay, order 15 instead, and I'll take the extra 5. I'll break them down. I'll do singles sales for you,
Yeah.
and then I'll give you a cut of the money. So
Right. Great.
And they would call me, like, if people came in to buy collections, and I would meet with the people and do the prices, and I would give them a cut of like.
Okay, so okay, great. A big Magic collector doing all this stuff. So how does this start leading you into Wizards and getting hired and that sort of thing?
So as I said, I played in a lot of tournaments.
Right.
I was at a tournament at ASU in '95.
ASU,
Arizona State University.
Okay, right.
And a couple of guys came up to me and they were like asking me like what I thought of the game, and I just started laying into about like, oh, nobody plays with creatures. It's all about spells. It's all about board control.
It's all screwed
There's
up.
all these like overpowered
The
cards.
game's horrible. Yeah, we
Everyone
heard a lot
plays
of
the
that. We heard a lot of that in the early '90s.
And these were designers from Wizards, and you knew they were designers?
No, I didn't.
Oh.
I hadn't met these two guys before.
Oh,
And
okay.
So like so they're like, oh, well, we work at the company. it was Joel Mick, who was a former R&D lead,
Yes.
and David Lee, who was a former worked in the legal department.
Right.
And they're like, would you be interested in flying out and interviewing for the company?
Right.
And I'm like, sure, that sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Sure.
An interesting story. The prize for that event was this double-headed axe, and a box of cards. Like
A double-headed axe.
Yes. So I have like this giant.
So you won.
Yeah.
Well,
so I won the.
I have a lot of weapons, but I'm a filmmaker. What were the Magic event coordinators doing with a double-headed
I don't
axe? Who knows? Anyway.
They just
good
thought it was
prize.
cool. It's
It's
got like a
cool.
fur handle, and
Right.
Nice.
it's kind of cool looking. I'm like, oh, that's kind of a cool prize. Plus a box of cards.
Yeah.
Like,
Great. Excellent.
so I ended up flying up and interviewing. The interview process was probably one of the more interesting interview processes I've ever gone through.
And this is '95?
This was it was in '95.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So okay.
Interesting interview process.
So
Did they have you like?
So this would be post Fallen Empires if it's in mid '95, right?
Yeah, it was.
So
Right. When I came up, it was
Ice Age era.
right.
So,
when I came up, they were working on finishing up alliances, and Fallen
Okay.
Empires was already out the door.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Just creating the context of where we're at in
Right.
the historical timeline of Magic, because everybody really remembers the history of Magic the Gathering by Magic sets.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do as well. Like I got in right before, like I got in May of '94, which is right when Legends was coming out.
Right. Yeah. You see, May '94 doesn't mean anything. Legends coming out. Yes. Now we all know exactly when that was. Okay. So you come up, weird interview. Tell me more about this interview process.
So it was like normally like in like interviews I had before, it's like you go and you talk to a person, they ask you a bunch of questions, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Right.
Here it was like you go in the morning. My first meeting was like with a couple people. Then I had a meeting with like 20 people.
Oof.
Then it's like, okay, now we want you to play games with these people for 2 hours. And then it's like, now you're gonna have another meeting with 20 people.
That's the way we did interviews back in the day. Emma. We were really trying to, if they could survive that, then they could survive a typical day at WotC.
Right.
Yeah.
Then a lot of these were like very confrontational. It's like, what do you like about Magic? What do you not like about it? Like, what would you fix if you could change things? Like all these But it was basically like a 7 or 8 hour
Whew.
like
Yeah.
interview, and they also had me play like a bunch of.
Well, obviously, it worked out a lot better than your medical
There-
interview did.
All right, rub it in, Peter.
It's-
The
see,
last thing I told you.
when I was
like, so
explaining
bad.
the X card thing, you could just say X card on the whole med school question, and we won't come back to it.
No, I mean I'm happy with how things have worked out.
Yes, yes.
So they're like a few days later they called and said we'd like to hire you.
Right. Good.
But as I said, I was working at the hospital, and the hospital had like these massive bonuses at the end of the year. So I'm like, well, is it okay if I start like after Christmas, and that way
Right.
I can get my year-end bonus, and
Right.
so they're like, oh, that's fine. We're bringing another designer on, Mark Rosewater, starting in October, so we'll bring him on first, then you'll come
Yeah.
on.
Perfect.
Going back, I probably would have just said, yeah, I'm going to go right away and
All right.
forget the bonus, because it was such a blast. So I came up in early December looking for an apartment,
Right.
and when I came up, I ended up finding an apartment. I stopped by the office, and Mike Davis was like who was the head of R&D at the time.
Yep.
Who
Mike
passed-
Davis, unfortunately, has passed. He was head of R&D, the first head of R&D for Wizard of the Coast, and he was also the person that introduced me to Richard Garfield.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, very important person in the history of Magic.
So he was like walking around introducing me to people, and everyone was like wearing black, which I later learned was normal anyway, but but everyone seemed like really sad, and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, oh, well, a bunch of people just got laid off yesterday.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mike's introducing me around
Yeah.
as like, this is Mike, he's our new R&D hire. He's like super excited, and everyone's like,
Awkward.
you hired a new person?
Yeah. Well, sorry for that little bit of awkwardness. Yeah, that was a sad day in the history of Wizards of the Coast. Not because of you, though. Because of, yeah. Well, we had to we abandoned our role-playing game strategy. The company we'd started Wizards of the Coast to do role-playing game products, and at some point we realized that Magic had become so much more important, and that our RPG efforts were modest, and we really should get out of that. And I remember saying that unless you've got Dungeons and Dragons, there's no good business reason to be in this category. And so, which kind of sets up what happened a couple of years, later. But
at the point.
but that was too bad.
So that's basically the setup for the origin story.
Yeah.
I've actually told the story probably 100, 150 times over the years. In fact, one of my friends, Ignacy, wrote this book called Board Games That Tell Stories.
And I think we have a picture of this. Yes, we have a picture. Yes.
And I said, okay, I'll write the thing, but I want to tell the story of how I got into gaming, because that's like one of the first questions people ask me.
Right.
Yeah.
And then instead of telling the 10-minute story, I can just say, oh, you can go read it in the book.
Yeah.
So we feel very privileged that we got to hear the story, because this is the last time Mike
that I'll
is ever going to
ever
tell the story. Yes. It might be first to you, but it's last for him. And from now on, you just have
Go
to
to the
go,
book.
go
You
buy
have
the
to
book. Yes,
go buy the
yes.
book, read
Yeah.
the story there.
Yeah, that's right.
So I started at the end of, I came out and I started the company, and it was kind of an interesting.
Yeah, what did you do? Like, what did? Oh, interesting. Yeah, sorry.
So I started out. I was hired as a developer.
Right. For Magic the Gathering.
Like almost everyone got hired in as a developer.
Not for a role-playing game. That would have been bad.
That would have been really awkward. Yeah.
Okay, poor taste. Sorry.
So I started out working on Magic sets. When I had come out originally, they had showed me like the Alliance set, so I kind of had a little feel for. One of the things they did during my pre-interview was they like showed me Alliance and said like, well, what do you think of these cards? And so I got to see that kind of before it came out. One of the cards I thought was really interesting was Primitive Justice.
Yes.
Which had this effect that you could pay extra mana to destroy an artifact. You could pay extra to destroy another artifact.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, like that would be like really cool to do as a mechanic.
Right.
One thing I also neglected dimension was like before I started working at WotC, I actually had designed kind of a magic set.
Okay, this actually relates back to chat. Has a question about this. They say that you designed a set at the beginning of your career that never got published. Is that or
yeah,
there's a rumor?
It was called Astral Ways, and I basically
Astral Waste?
Astral Ways.
Astral Ways.
Yeah.
If you said Astral Waste, I think I could see myself having just killed that set based on the name.
Yeah.
Astral Waste. Yeah, I think, yes, you're right. We never did publish Astral Waste.
No, it didn't get published, but the company basically took it off of me, and I basically signed a thing saying they had the rights to it.
Oh,
Right.
cool.
And some of the stuff ended up in many later sets, like the Slivers was from there, the original version of Cycling.
Slivers.
Yeah.
Slivers, like that's huge.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Slivers were big.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
that's-
we're not just Slivers yet, though, right? We're the first
Okay,
set.
okay.
I'm excited about Slivers, too.
we can
Very
come-
excited.
Okay, we're not just Slivers yet.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're back to like you first started working at Wizards of the Coast. So what did you think of the environment at Wizards of the Coast? Like,
So it was definitely a lot different than working in a hospital where
Yeah.
I had to often wear a suit and a tie. Like I went in and like Scaff, I sat between Scaff Elias and Mark Rosewater.
oh my God,
And
two of the loudest people I know. I could just see.
and everyone sat in these quad cubes. So like you'd work and then like you could take a break and there was basically a center table. Like it was basically 4 outer facing computers with a table in the center.
Right.
So you could kind of push your chair back and then you'd be at the table in the center and you
Yeah.
could play games.
I remember those. Yep.
And
Yeah. You could just turn around and play a game. Yeah.
right.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so like we would like basically the environment was you came in the morning around 9 a.m.
Right.
You would basically work at your computer, work on files. Every so often you would get together and meet in one of the meeting rooms and talk over the stuff you'd been working on during the day. You'd go to lunch together, you'd come back, you'd do more stuff. You'd go out to dinner together. So like basically it was just a group of people that were just constantly together. It was,
Wow.
It was me, Bill Rose, Mark Rosewater, William Jockish, and then Henry Stern joined fairly soon after that.
That was your core group. That
was kind of the core group.
for a while anyway. I'm sure it got mixed up
and
later. But yeah.
We after like even after dinner you would go back to the office and,
Yeah.
and work and sometimes you'd like there was the WotC had just moved from their old office over to this new office that was these 4 buildings.
Yep.
And one of the
Which is not the office they're in today, but
Right,
it was the
it was-
office
it
that
was a
yeah.
transition office.
Most of my memories of Wizard of the Coast, I mean,
are
after
in-
we left the basement of my home, were in that square group with the mana pool in the
Right,
middle.
yeah. There was a fountain in the center, everyone called the mana pool, which was
Nice.
kind of fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the east building was mostly vacant except for Peter's office. And there was a big room.
My mother calling. Sorry, Mom. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll put this on airplane mode. There you go. Turn off the Wi-Fi, all that stuff like that. All the stuff I was supposed to do earlier. Okay, Wi-Fi off. Great. Sorry. Okay. Yes,
so-
big area.
So there's a big area. One of the rooms was this massively big room. And we would, as I said, Scaff sat next to me.
Yeah.
One of the first things I noticed when I started there was this huge stack of hockey sticks on top of Scaff's cubicle.
Hockey sticks.
Hockey
yeah,
sticks.
Oh, yeah. I think I know where this story's going. Yes. The whole
So
hockey stick.
I'm like, what are the hockey sticks for? So like a couple nights later, Scaff's like, grabs the stack of hockey sticks and says, come on, let's go. So we go over to the east building. At the end of each side of this huge, massive room,
Right.
they set up tables, and basically everyone had a hockey stick and you were in a roller chair, and you went around playing
Desk chairs.
In a
yeah.
roller chair.
yeah.
Oh.
in a roller chair playing chair hockey,
Chair hockey. Yes.
and we
the
played,
tables were the goals, right?
and the tables were the goals. If you could hit the tennis ball between the legs of the table, you scored a point.
Yes.
And so basically you were like going back and forth passing it, and it was a fairly aggressive like
Yeah.
Yes.
style game. We broke a lot of chairs, which eventually caused them to tell us to stop playing the game so that room we also there was like a little LAN system there with 8 computers,
Yes.
and
Next to the death hockey chair.
No,
It's like
it
there's
was-
just computers.
Yeah.
No, that was outside of the.
Okay.
Yeah.
The room
Somebody
we were-
hits the ball, like, oh no, you just hit a computer.
The room we were playing in was actually called the all hands room after when it was set up.
Yes. Yes.
Uh,
Yeah. Speaking of which, wasn't I think an all hands meeting featured in your onboarding
Yes.
process?
So, my first all hands meeting was kind of an interesting experience.
This is the thing we did. We had Vince Calori actually on the show a few weeks ago, and I learned this from him. He was such a great leader. I worked for him at the Boeing company, and once every few months, we'd all the engineers, we'd all get in a big bay in a big group, and he'd stand up on a desk and give some sort of speech, and he just had a way. We were like, yeah. So I always imagined myself as, having that sort of leadership charisma, but most of the stories I hear about the all hands meeting don't really talk about that.
Interesting. So I was sitting at my desk. It's almost 10 a.m. and Bill says, "Oh, we all have to go to the all hands meeting now." And I'm like, "What's an all hands meeting?" And he's like, "Oh, well, Peter gives us some sort of a pep talk."
Yep, that's very much like the story I used to hear. Yeah.
He's like, "You can bring notes and work while we're."
Yeah. Exactly.
So I'm in the all hands meeting and I'm listening, and Peter talks about a few announcements. And then he goes, "Oh, I hear we have a new hire in R&D, Mike Elliott." He goes, "Mike Elliott, could you come up, please?" And so he calls me up, and I'm like, "Well, okay, this seems weird." He calls me up because this is Mike. He's our new R&D hire.
Yeah.
And he goes, and he's going to be running the employee magic tournament tonight. And I'm like, "Oh, I am?"
Oh my gosh. Surprise.
Yeah.
I'm like, "Great,
Yeah.
put me on the spot." So,
That definitely sounds like something I probably did.
Probably. You can neither confirm nor deny. So did you
Yes.
run the tournament?
so after
See, Derek, you and the other Gen Con players have no idea how easy you have it. I mean, just
I hear that they have food trucks now
Yes.
at the all hands at Watsy. So
well, there you go.
possible.
There you go.
So,
All right, yes.
so afterwards, I'm like, "What am I supposed to do?" And Joel's like, "Well, you're in charge. Do whatever you want."
Yeah.
So how did the tournament go off?
The tournament went well. We had about 130 people.
Oh wow.
Wow.
And basically, the tournaments back then where you got basically a deck, one of the randomized decks.
Yeah.
You put together cards. They
So
had
sealed deck tournament.
Yeah, it was
format.
basically a sealed deck format,
Okay.
and you would play. And one thing I learned from that was that like the R&D people were a lot better in later tournaments. There was like extra points, so you got extra rewards if you beat R&D people.
Yes.
We set up
Yes.
kind of the R&D bounty, but it went pretty smoothly.
Yeah, I always had this goal of like being good enough at Magic that if I was playing somebody from R&D and they fell asleep, that I could beat them, right? Like it's
Yeah.
like I should just set the bar to you at least have to be awake and engaged to beat me at Magic.
They missed out on like 2 or 3 turns. You'd be able
Yeah.
to get in there.
Yeah.
Well, there's always this misconception that designers are like amazing at the games that they design. It's
true.
Which
Yeah.
is not true. Like
Yeah.
the hierarchy generally goes designers, then developers. Like developers can basically beat designers, and then all the people outside that spend hours and hours playing the game,
Yeah.
who can basically
Crush the developers.
crush anyone that works at the company.
Yes, there's actually a fourth category to that, to your analogy, which is actually on the other side of that spectrum. Before designers are game publishers.
There-
All right.
Yeah, game publishers. I have often been like, oh my gosh, I played Peter Adkison. He wasn't really that good. Well, talk smack. I'm the business guy, okay? Yeah, go ahead. Talk smack that you beat the business guy. That's fine.
I think you beat me with I think I got mana screwed or
Yeah,
something.
you got mana screwed.
Yeah.
You were being nice to me. We had just met.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned you were hired as a developer. At that point, was it broke? Was there just developers, or there's developers and designers?
So it was kind of a blurry line. The first set that I worked on there was Mirage,
Okay.
which Bill Rose led the development team on.
Right.
And over the years, I worked on I think 30 Magic sets, and
Well,
but-
that seems like a great segue into the world. This is actually why most people, I think, watch this show, especially when we have a designer on or a developer on. Like, let's get into some stories about designing Magic cards. Yeah. So you worked first on Mirage, which I
Right.
think was that was Bill's group had started working on Mirage.
In
They
90.
called something else originally. I can't remember.
Yeah, it was called. Gosh, the code name.
Yeah, there's a code name.
Every set had a code name.
Yeah, it had been, but he had started working on that clear back at University of Pennsylvania, right?
Right.
As a playtester in the original Magic set. So this set had been around a while as something we wanted to do.
So on that one, I was strictly a developer, but we got to fill in some holes.
Right.
One of the funner holes was there was this idea that like we should do like these marquee cards in every set.
Okay. Right. There should be cards that people really want in the set. Yes.
So as I said, I sat next to Mark Rosewater.
Right.
So Mark's like, we should go brainstorm and come up with like a really cool marquee card that we can stick in the set. So like we went over to like a quiet spot over by Sean Karn's desk.
Wait. The quiet spot. Okay. I'm trying to get Sean on the show, so I'll ask him if there was ever a moment where it was quiet by his desk. Probably when he wasn't there. Yes.
So we're bouncing ideas back and forth, and Mark had this idea for like, he's like, well, what if you took over your opponent's hand and you basically took their turn for them?
Right.
Which many years later became a card called Mindslaver.
Okay.
And the idea I had was, well, what if you could go through their deck, take a card, and play that card? And like you'd like be stealing one of their best cards and using it against them.
Right.
And that card ended up being Grinning Totem, which went into Mirage, which was one of the
marquee cards of Mirage. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which had the effect. It was like a popular,
Which could be
exciting
great
card
if you were
that
playing.
wasn't tournament.
Yeah, if you were playing a similar deck, especially, right? If you were playing the same
Right. Yeah.
colors.
You could get a piece that you're missing.
But
Right.
worst case, you're taking away their best cards.
Right. Even if you don't use it, you're taking it away. Like if they have some sort of key card that you can kind of steal it out of their deck and burn it.
Yeah.
So would this card go into your hand?
It was exiled.
Oh, it was
and
exiled,
you could,
okay,
and
yeah.
you could play it until the end of it.
But you could play it right there in the moment, right?
Right.
Like you got the card out of their deck,
Yeah.
and you could choose either play it and go to exile,
Right.
or
You
just
put
go into
the you
exile.
put the artifact out, then you sack the artifact. You search their deck, took a card, and you could
Right.
play the card until your next upkeep. I think it was.
Nice.
Cool. Okay.
And
So you designed a good card for Magic. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of like one of the.
What else did you do?
So
First of many. I know. First of many.
so my first actual lead design thing was on a non-Magic set.
Okay.
I got to be in charge of the company was doing a game called Netrunner at the time.
Yes.
And I got to be in charge of a set called Silent Impact.
Yes.
And I was like excited. I got my own team. Like we had meetings, we set it up. We made this like what I thought was an amazing file. And 3 weeks later, the project got canceled.
Yes.
And they ended up using a lot of the stuff in Netrunner Classic later. But it was kind of like heart wrenching that like, oh, my first design project got.
Yeah.
But during Weatherlight, I got to sit in on the design team toward the end because the design team was running long. I was the lead developer on Weatherlight, and the design team was having problems because people kept coming in and out because they had other projects. So I got to kind of sit in on the design for Weatherlight a little bit. And that was kind of the first like design team I got to sit on. And then after that, I was on the design team that Mark led for Tempest,
Okay.
which was Mark Rosewater, Richard Garfield, Charlie Catino, and myself.
Fun
that
group.
was-
Fun group. A lot of name dropping there. Yeah.
And that was like kind of my first real experience.
Like from the beginning. Being on a
Right,
design team.
right, yeah.
Womb to tomb
Mark
on-
ran like a really good team and like and it was really fun. Like we would, as I said, I'd done kind of a lot of stuff going in.
Right.
And one of the mechanics that I'd done earlier was Slivers, which ended up being in that set. Like what?
So what was the inspiration for Slivers?
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm interested to hear this.
So the actual Slivers actually started when I was staring at a Plague-Rat card.
a plague rack.
Okay. Yeah.
So Plague-Rats basically get bonuses based on other Plague-Rats. And I'm like, well, what if you did like Plague-Rats for abilities? And like you had just basically instead of like just giving power and toughness to other things, what if you also gave like flying, first strike,
Right.
and so that was basically where Slivers came from.
Right.
And like in my kind of story arc concept, I had the idea that like, oh, it was this massively like interdimensional being that got smashed into a million pieces. And and that's where Sliver, the name, that's one of the few ones where I named it something and the name stuck.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, we usually don't let that happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Like such a good name.
It was. Yeah.
Like a lot of the other mechanics like have the name changes over the years, and the version that you start with in playtest ends up coming like I think Madness was originally called like Deathcast or something.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. In that case, Madness. That's better. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing, Slivers too, is so evocative, and it has a following as well.
Yes,
you know,
that's
like over the years, it's come back now. You know, like they've printed, I think it was Modern Horizons, where they just recently started doing new Sliver stuff as well. But throughout the years,
it's one they brought back a number of
and
times.
people are attached. People are like Team Sliver, right?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a lot of mechanics where you'll do something and it'll come back like many years later.
Yeah.
Or some variation of it will come back over the years.
And so that was Tempest?
That was in Tempest. Yeah.
That was great. Excellent. Yeah, good. Good job.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, that was a really fun team. Like
I'm gonna go back in time to that year and say, well done, Mike. Well done.
yeah, they weren't all good. So
yeah, speaking of Urza Saga.
So after
Oh, dun dun.
so after Tempest, I actually led the next 4 sets. I did Stronghold, Exodus, Urza Saga, and Urza's Legacy.
Right.
I got to lead like 4 sets in a row.
Awesome.
And Stronghold and Exodus went fine. On Urza's Saga, there were some problems.
Okay.
As I said, there were only 5 of us at the time. It was Mark, Henry,
Mark Rosewater, Henry Stern,
Bill Rose,
William
Jockish, and myself.
Yes.
So Bill was kind of transitioning into being like the head of R&D, and Joel was kind of moving up. So Bill was taking on a lot of administrative duties.
Right.
So he wasn't really available. At the time, Mark was working on a project called Unglued.
Yes.
Oh, yes, I heard about this.
Yes.
And Mark was like super excited, and he was like doing all this crazy stuff. So he was like not really that available for Urza Saga.
Right.
And Henry Stern was working on a project called Portal 3 Kingdoms.
Yes.
So all 3
Which
of
was
those
our big launch of Magic the Gathering in China.
Oh, okay.
We sort of rebranded, if you will, Magic as being about the 3 Kingdoms, which is a big epic period of Chinese history.
Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So all 3 of those were going on at the same time. And so the design team was originally supposed to be like me, Bill Rose, and Mark Rosewater. But Bill and Mark, I think we actually had like maybe 2 meetings.
Right.
But I got like
You've come a long ways from 4 people with a table in the middle playing. Yes. Okay.
So a lot of the set was put together from notes like, as I mentioned, kind of the earlier version of cycling we talked about. The Urza Saga featured cycling as like one of the major mechanics.
Right.
One of the early versions we had talked about during the Tempest development team. Like in my Astral Waste set, I actually had like the 3 primitive cycling ones, which were these cards where you could pay 1 red mana and put it on the bottom of the deck and draw a card.
Right.
And Richard thought that was kind of kludgy that you put the card on the bottom of the deck. He thought that was like too mechanical, and so he came up with the discard version, which is the version that ended up getting published.
Right.
Mark and I probably did like 100 cycling cards each.
And by the way, congratulations. Well done. Cycling's a great
Cycling's
mechanic.
great, yeah.
Great mechanic. Well done.
Well,
Your stock is rising, Mr. Elliott.
I got kind of the assist on that one. It was so Mark and I had done like probably 100 cycling cards each between Tempest and Urza Saga, like in anticipation of, we're going to use this mechanic next set.
Right.
So I had like a whole bunch of notes from Mark and Bill, and those kind of got hobbled together into a set. We threw in a few other kind of cool things. And like I did like the cycle of the lands, like Tolarian Academy, Gaia's Cradle.
Right.
And but a lot of the development was basically me and William playing at the center table.
Yes.
And we're trying to test 300 some odd cards.
Yeah.
So we might have missed a few, possibly.
Any in particular?
Yeah.
So the worst one was a card I did called Windfall, which was two colorless and one blue, and you could draw as many cards as your opponent. And that one was banned day one.
Banned day one. Yay!
So
Urza Saga's release. Next day. Banned. Windfall.
So there was all this furor over the fact that we were banning a common card that everyone got in all these packs. Because Windfall, not only was it banned, it was a common card. So it's like, great. Like, not only do we not recognize how stupidly broken this card was, but it was a common card.
Well, I mean, I think it's an important point that, like, no matter how good of a designer you are, you still need a lot of testing. I mean, you have 300 something cards to go through, and all the interactions, and plus with all the other cards from the other sets you're playing, like, that's a lot. Like,
this whole story, by the way, is a setup for the interview we did with Randy Bueller a couple weeks ago.
Why did Magic start getting good developers?
With hiring the pros.
Yeah, Randy Bueller hired out the Pro Tour because Urza Saga. Hey, yes, please.
Yeah,
yes,
but you're skipping the beatdown part of the story. Yes. So the set comes out, like there's all these feedback about all these broken cards. We ended up having to ban some stuff. So Bill comes up to R&D and he says, Peter wants to see us now. And I'm like, okay. So like we all march up to Peter's office. He calls us in and he's like, this is really unacceptable. We had to ban stuff. We had to do a lot of publicity on this. And like just yells at us for about 20 minutes.
I'm picturing myself walking back and forth, pacing.
And
yes,
he yells at us for about 20 minutes, and he's basically saying like the peer. He's like, if you guys can't fix this, we're gonna have to do something and fix it for you. He's like, if this, and it's like we're just like all looking really dejected. And I think Peter realized that we were looking really dejected because, like, after about 20 minutes...
I can only maintain that for a few minutes.
I know, I can't picture it, really.
Like, if we'd walked out at that point, it would have been like, ooh, this is... But Peter goes, oh, on the bright side, though, the stores are saying that it's selling better than any set we've ever had.
Hey.
And he said, I've gotten a lot of comments on new players coming into the game that are super excited about the set. And he went on for about 10 minutes on like how positive things are, and then he's like, okay, and don't do that again.
Yeah.
So I walk out and I'm like standing next to Bill, and I'm like, I kind of got some mixed messages on.
There you go.
Are we not supposed to do that again? Are we supposed to do it?
I'm reminded of my close friend Adrian Swartout, who used to run Gen Con for us for about 10 years. And she used to always say that her management philosophy was the iron fist and the velvet glove. Yes, so yeah, exactly. Nice mix.
So the upshot of that was that it freed up the budget, and they were able to hire in a bunch of developers because it was very clear that everyone in R&D was overworked to the point where even working our 12-hour days wasn't.
Well, and also it backs up what you were saying earlier about how the as you started working, as people became developers and started working as developers, then they fell off of being the best Magic players in the world. The best Magic players in the world were becoming. Oh, and also the Pro Tour was rising in status, and we noticed that as the Pro Tour was launched, and over the first couple of years, especially the Pro Tour being out there, the level of play among the top players, because of the tournaments and the money and everything else, just became bigger and bigger and bigger, and became harder. And so I remember Scaff coming up to me at one point and say, "How would you feel about us recruiting from the Pro Tour?" And
right. Which is smart. You want to get the... Yeah,
that's totally made sense, and that's what we did. And we ended up, when we hired Randy Bueller, I think it was the first of those hires. But
and then you got Mike Turian, Brian Schneider,
and so on.
Nate Heiss, there were a bunch of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't have a lot of time left. Like the time has flown.
Well, we started late though. I just assume we
Yeah.
gotta go.
Gonna go for a few extra
I don't know what
minutes.
time. I think we can go for another hour if we wanted to.
Yeah, with Mike, I mean, there's just so much richness here in the topic.
Yeah. Okay. So, let's before we kind of get to the wind down sequence, any other stories from this period that I failed to prompt you on?
Yeah, one of the things, like after during Urza's saga, I was also pushing for kind of another initiative that I'm fairly proud of.
Yeah.
When I used to buy and sell cards, I had a rule that I would never buy from anyone under 18 because I didn't want to be perceived as kind of ripping people off.
Right. Right. If
So
they were adult idiots, no problem.
right, if
Yeah.
you're adult idiots and you want to sell me, and
Yeah.
I was like fairly fair. I would give people like basically good prices on their good cards, and then I would take all the rest of it and I would kind of make a lot of the stuff off in.
Yeah. Well, because a lot of people, even today, just the value, they don't know. They come to you as the expert, and there could be something in there worth hundreds of dollars, right? And they don't know, so there is an opportunity there.
Yeah.
But I would see adults like rip these kids off at the stores and the parks.
gosh, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
oh, I'll give
Yeah.
you a
Yeah.
crawworm for your Savon Dragon.
Yeah.
And it used to really piss me off that like you couldn't figure out like what cards were valuable.
Interesting.
So I was like, well, what if we put the rarity symbols on the cards? And I'm like, they do that in Japan on Pokemon. Like it shouldn't be a problem. And I talked to Jeff Christensen, who is the legal counsel at the time.
Yep. Death March.
And
That was his nickname. Okay, I have to tell that story real
Sidebar.
quick. So we used to have these staff meetings with like 20 people every week, and it would go about 2 or 3 hours. And one time, Jeff Christensen made this comment about the weekly staff meeting being a death march, and then from then on, he became Jeff Death March Christensen. So anyway, yes. Okay, back to you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
so he's like,
Yeah.
well, you can't do something like that because that would perceive that different cards had different values and like that. And he was like worried about like issues
What,
with.
gambling?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
That was a big deal that we were worried about in those days about
the early days.
perception of gambling. Yeah. Yeah. Mid 90s, late 90s. Yeah.
So I was like, well, what if you had some sort of graphical treatment on it that we could put on where we didn't actually say what the rarities are, we just did different graphical treatments for the different groups.
Right.
So that got bounced around for a while, and eventually that developed into the rarity symbols,
Yeah.
where we did black
Yeah.
for common, silver for uncommon, gold for
Yes.
rares, and then later they added.
I remember that was a decision that was difficult for me. Like I remember us talking about that and going. It did get bandied around a little bit. I was slow to get sold on that idea, but yeah, in retrospect, it was obviously a great idea.
But that was one I felt was kind of important, and I was very happy that it eventually got implemented.
Yeah.
And we also implemented the collector numbers
Right.
at the same time.
And this is a nice tie back to you having been a big collector
Right.
of Magic cards.
Yes.
From in fact, I think we have an image from Inquest magazine.
Well,
Yes.
on top of it.
Yeah.
of-
So when I
of you being like the glamour cover centerfold.
a centerfold, yes, I have a
centerfold of
gaming
Inquest.
centerfold. Like,
Nice. I love it.
well, don't let that burn your eyes out.
That's
Yeah,
spooks.
when I started at WotC, I basically mothballed my whole collection,
Right.
and at one point I had probably 500,000 cards.
Right.
It was a pretty crazy collection, and
Yeah.
I still have pieces of the collection left, but I've been selling it off over the years, and it keeps getting more and more valuable as I sell stuff off. It's kind of crazy
Yeah.
how the collector market has gone.
So for the collector numbers, that's each card has its own number, like a
it'll
unique
say like
identifier.
well, it'll say like 7 out of 323. It just like shows you what number it is in the set. So like if
Yeah.
you're a collector, you
So
can put it in a binder in that order, and
Yeah.
I'm missing
can
card
see-
9.
Yeah.
I'm missing
yes.
card, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know how many to collect.
But that's, I mean, these things have percolated throughout the industry because I used to work at Mox Boarding House and I actually packed in Card Kingdom for a little bit where they go through and they have those number identifiers where you look on the sheet. So you're making sure that the customer is getting the exact card that they're
Right,
looking
right.
for.
Right. And one of the other things that I kind of stole from Pokemon was they had these foil cards, and we were
Ooh.
looking at ways to do cards that were cards that players would like but didn't impact gameplay.
Right.
Like I really hated like the book cards where it's like, oh, you have to buy the book and you get the special card that you can only get there. And I'm like, we can't do stuff like that. But what if we could do things like where you got like parallel foil inserts? So
parallel being, it's the same card, it's just there's a foil version and a regular version.
Yeah.
So the first one was Lightning Dragon, which appeared in Urza Saga as like the pre-release card.
Yeah.
And then we did it as the full parallel set starting in Urza's Legacy.
Right. It's well done, Mr. Elliott. Well done. Bravo. Excellent. So, is there any other questions from chat? Or
I don't think so. I've been keeping an eye on it.
So, we do have to wrap up. So, you said you worked something like, in summary, like something like 30 sets of Magic and
I worked there
a
for
whole
10
list of big mechanics. I remember you rattled off
I did, in addition to the ones we talked about, I did Madness, Amplify, Echo, Fading, the Rancor mechanic, Revels, Lycids. I did well over 1,000 cards while I was there. I mean, and I worked on 30 sets.
What a legacy.
Yeah.
I think WotC got a good deal.
Yeah. When as I say, I started out as a developer, then I transitioned to a designer, then I was a senior designer. Then when Richard left, I actually was a lead designer for non-Magic.
Right.
I got to.
So quickly, just in a few minutes, take us from the end of your glorious Magic career up to 2019.
Because that was just the start of your career.
Yeah, summarize the next 20 years in 5 minutes.
So while I was at Wizards, I did several trading card games, including I designed the Duel Masters trading card game.
Right.
For Wizards.
For Wizards, which is still a very big hit in Japan.
Excellent.
When I left, I did another trading card game for Bandai called Battle Spirits, which is also a very big hit in Japan. Over the years, I've done 20 trading card games.
Wow.
Like recently, one of the more recent ones is Dice Masters, which is kind of a hybrid card dice.
And that's for WizKids, right?
That's for WizKids.
Is that out or is it?
Yeah, that's out.
It's out.
It's out, and we've done like an interesting point. One of the brands that we did was Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, the other.
Everything ties back.
Yeah, the other of the 2 best games in the world that were both published by Wizards of the Coast.
I've had probably 70, 80 games published now.
Nice.
I actually did my first kids game this year, which was a game called Snowman Dice, where you're basically rolling dice and you're trying to build a snowman and then push it forward with your finger to the center. So
I guess I didn't realize that you designed Snowman Dice. That's a good game.
Yeah.
I got to play it at Gamma. It was really fun.
Yeah.
Excellent.
No, wait, at Origins. I got to play it at Origins.
It doesn't quite fit the mold of the like Star Trek Fleet Captains or some of my big box games, but
yeah, no, but it was super fun.
Last pair of questions, and then we're gonna wrap up. Last pair of questions. So, what have you taken with you from your experience at Wizard of the Coast, and what were you happy to kind of leave behind?
So what I took with me, I mean, I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't studied Richard Garfield's games and worked with him and Bill Rose and Mark Rosewater. Yeah. Like, if I hadn't worked with those guys, I wouldn't know like how to design games like I can now. I mean, and
we were all so blessed to work with Richard.
Yeah, I mean, he's like just his thought processes. Like, I would like look at the games he did and which ones like and how they were received, and that just taught me so much about like just basic game design.
Yes.
I don't know if I miss working on Magic. I don't know if there was anything I left behind that I'm upset about.
Right.
I do miss working on Magic. Like every so often I'll come up with a new mechanic.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, I can't make this because I don't work on the
game.
Right.
So I have like this file.
You can give it to them, but maybe you could put it into one of your other new trading card games.
So occasionally I'll use like
I'll occasionally
I'll use them as the basis for some new game.
Right.
but I have like this file, like if they ever like bring me
ever
back as a
tap
guest.
you?
If they ever reach out. Yes.
Do we have time for a couple of chat questions?
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
do we have time, Derek? Or yeah, Derek
Derek,
says.
thumbs up.
If
All
it's
right.
a chat question, we have time. Yes.
All right, first up, what are your top 3 sets for drafting?
Top 3 sets for drafting.
Either pass.
And who's this from?
I don't have the names in here.
Oh, okay.
There.
Well, it's I don't keep up as much on the current environment because
Yeah, sure.
the ones that I used to like to draft were like Ravnica. I mean,
Yeah.
like Ravnica block was like one of the last blocks I worked on, and that was really fun to draft because you had the dual color, tricolor cards, and it was kind of really challenging.
Yeah.
That was probably my favorite. But when I left, I mostly started working on new projects and other things.
Yeah.
My son got into Magic for a while during like the Boros blocks in that period.
Nice.
So I got kind of back in the game for a while. But now he's moved on to sports and girls. So
we will get him back.
you'll get him back.
We will
when
get
he's
him
in
back.
college.
that period
They
lasts
always
about
come
4
back.
years, and
Yeah.
then they come back to gaming. They always.
Well,
do,
there's the
yeah.
old adage of if you're a game designer, you spend all your time designing games, not as much time to play. Did you get to check out Modern Horizons at all? Did you look at the stuff they were coming out, like all the nostalgia?
I follow a lot of this. I mean, I look over it. I don't get to play a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I barely get to play like a lot of the games that are out. I mean,
Right.
there's so many games nowadays.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, everybody in chat, thank you for your questions. But just so you know, our guests have no knowledge of anything's happened in the last 18 years. It's just-
Yeah, you're here for modern tales.
Yes, right. Yeah, there's another show for that. No, no,
This is just about the Wizards of the Coast days.
No, seriously, thank you for your questions. All right, okay, well, we're going to wrap it up. And thank you so much for
Thank you
being
for having me.
on
It was-
Fireside with us. And thank you, thanks to our guest, Mike Elliott, for being on Fireside with Peter Adkison, and my co-host, Emma Larkins. Also, our technical director, Will Geisling, our producer, Derek Guter. We are here on Gen Con TV. We are broadcasting from the Chaldea Studios. But thanks most of all to you for watching. Please come back next week, and we will be back next week. Our guest will be Sandra Everingham, yes, who was one of the earliest, one of the original Magic artists for Magic the Gathering.
Ooh.
Did Dark Ritual, several other cards in the very first set, and also was hired at Wizards and worked in the production department and managed the production department for a while. So she's got some great stories. And in 2 weeks from now, our guest will be Richard Garfield himself.
Wow.
Yeah. So what's the date in 2 weeks? I forgot to look it up, but who knows? 2 weeks from now. Yes. So please come back, join us here. If you between now and next week, please join us at 11 a.m. on Fridays for table takes and 5 p.m. Pacific time for Brothers Murph on Mondays. Did I get all that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Excellent.
All right.
Good job.
Woohoo! We get a thumbs up. All right. Thanks. Sorry we started a little late. We had a bridge out, but the bridge got put back together, I guess, when everybody got here.
Reassembled.
So see you next week.